Does leadership often feel like the stepchild of the spiritual gifts? I mean, that's a pressure we don't often talk about. The church needs leadership, yet leadership sounds, well, just sounds very corporate, doesn't it? I mean, preaching reaches and edifies, it fills seats, prayer really does feel holy, but leadership, it just feels corporate, organizational. And because of this kind of unspoken ranking system, here's what I have found. I think pastors either feel the need to suppress their leadership gift, maybe out of guilt, or they try to fake it when it's not their gift at all. And the problem is on both extremes, churches are left really kind of stuck. I mean, think about both sides of leadership, really like a gifting, right? If you think about both those sides, pastors with the leadership gift, they often feel maybe less holy, almost guilty, maybe that's what they're so good at. They've been told that leadership is less sacred, or at least they've been led to believe that. So they bury it under sermon prep or pastoral care. Of course, the problem though is that that isn't primarily maybe a strength of theirs, and churches without leadership drift into visionlessness. And, Solomon told us, right? Where there is no vision, people are going to perish. And so leadership, pastors who have that gift often don't feel as spiritual because of that gift, because it is their strongest gift. Pastors on the other side, without that leadership gift, they feel pressured to lead anyway. Because on some level, even if leadership feels corporate in the church setting, every pastor knows that leadership is required. On some level, it's necessary. So what do these people do, right? Pastors without a leadership gifting, they just grind harder. I mean, they burn out eventually, but they almost like hope effort will maybe make up for the lack of spiritual gifting. And you know what that does? It just creates bottlenecks and lots of burnout, frustration, and almost maybe or worse, like a pastor without the leadership gifts. They're like kind of the. Often, I find that these people are the kind of the card carrying, flag waving, get leadership out of the church proponents, and it's not because in their heart of hearts they don't believe leadership matters. It's just not their gifting, and so they're become almost opposed to it as a gift. I mean, maybe that's for another episode, perhaps. But I mean, I've heard plenty of anti-leadership pastors promoting their stance out of insecurity, not biblical authority. But again, it's not for today. So let's kind of get back to this leadership gift. No matter where you stand on leadership and ministry, we can all agree that suppressing leadership creates visionless churches. You can't do that. And hoarding leadership creates bottleneck churches. Both are a problem, and neither reflect really the Spirit's design, especially in that gift. The Apostle Paul, again, who, I never saw his spiritual gifts inventory, so I don't know what his gifts were, but leadership certainly seems to be one of those. So Paul gave us some wisdom on this topic, right? Remember, Paul never ranked the gifts. In Romans 12, he wrote, if it is to lead, do it diligently. And he didn't whisper it as an afterthought. He said, oh, and by the way, leadership might be important. I mean, it was core as a spiritual gift. He didn't also, by the way, call it a corporate add-on. He named leadership as a spirit-given gift, which I think changes a lot of stuff for us. It changes maybe everything for some of us. I mean, leadership is not a personality type or, business savvy. It's a spirit-given capacity to guide God's people towards God's mission, which means a lot of things. Let me give you two. One, it means if leadership is your gift, you have to stop apologizing for that. You should lean into that gift. Read books, listen to podcasts, attend conferences, get coaching. I mean, develop it like you would develop any other gift. The most important spiritual thing you can do is use the gift that God gave you. Now, on the other side, right, number two, if leadership is not your gift, I think we have to stop pretending that it is, and definitely stop downplaying its position in the local church. Like, your job is not to fake it, it's to empower those in your church who carry that gift so that you can be more focused on carrying the gift that God gave you. That is not weakness, right? That's just wisdom. It's the body of Christ, right? All parts of the body functioning as it's designed to function. Like I have seen this play out in countless churches. One pastor I worked with had incredible preaching skills, but didn't have really a leadership gifting, and the church was plateaued. Once he, through coaching and all that, but once he identified leaders in the congregation and then empowered them to drive the systems and some strategy and all those things, the church broke through that plateau and they found all sorts of new momentum. Not because the pastor decided to just, bear down and become a leader. He just decided that if that wasn't his primary gifting, that he could, as the senior pastor, as the leader, as the point leader, give away a lot of that leadership. And it freed him up to do what only he could do in that church. So, of course, on the other hand, I've also worked with some churches and pastors who have very strong leadership gifts, who at times feel guilty about spending time on strategy and staff development. Once these pastors embraced that their leadership was spirit given, they really started building healthy churches. And by the way, their preaching didn't decline, but their churches finally had both the spiritual depth and the organizational clarity. Let me just tell you a quick kind of story, I guess, from my life as a leader. Some of you know this, but I spent a decade in the marketplace working in consulting and marketing strategy and things like that before going into ministry. And I really felt, in hindsight, called to ministry probably even in college, high school, college. I just didn't know how to interpret it and wasn't sure that's truly what it was, and was also focused on making money. So studied marketing in college and got an MBA and started doing this corporate gig. And I was good at it, but I hated it, really, to be honest. And so when I felt called into ministry, here I am with the spiritual gift of leadership and an MBA and marketing experience and marketplace experience. And now I want to work at the church. And I look around at the churches that I had been a part of before and the current one that I was involved in, and I just didn't see a lot of people who looked like me in that church staff. I didn't see a lot of people who this sounds weird to say, but like were gifted in the way that I was gifted. I mean, there were some incredible people at this church and they were gifted for sure, but just gifted in areas that weren't necessarily leadership. And so I wasn't even sure I could work at a church with that gift. I wasn't even sure if the church needed that gift. Of course, I was, 27, 28, 29, and it didn't take long for me to take a step into church and realize that the church desperately needed leadership. But here's the weird part for me too. I would bump into people all the time who would say, "You're not like most pastors," or "You're not like my previous pastor." And I took it as a compliment. I don't know that it was always meant that way, because I had to learn to be a pastor, not just a leader. I had to learn to kind of move that spiritual gifting, and God did this, right? But move that spiritual gift of leadership into more of a shepherding pastoral leadership gift, not just a corporate leadership gift. And I think that's the issue that we struggle with a lot, that for those of you who have a leadership gifting, or even if you don't, right? We think of it as being so corporate. I mentioned this earlier. We think of it as being corporate. And so therefore, when we are a person with that leadership gift, we don't realize that that leadership gifting is a spectrum that can be used in many different ways. When you think about some of the great leaders that have come along, maybe you think of presidents or CEOs or people like that, but it doesn't mean that you can't be a dynamic leader and do it as a pastor, a dynamic leader who does it by shepherding people. Again, even that word shepherd, it connotates kind of this caring, nurturing, but man, shepherds were pretty rough people. I mean, they're leading sheep, and sheep aren't the easiest thing to lead, really, because they're not the smartest, we have learned. Not saying that about your congregation. That's just how sheep are. But they're not the smartest. They desperately need a leader. They need somebody to protect them, to guide them. I mean, they carry a shepherd's staff. Why? Well, sometimes for rebuke, sometimes for course correction, also sometimes for saving. So leadership in the church, it isn't organizational, it isn't corporate. It can be very caring, but it's very necessary. So here's what I would love for you to think about, or maybe even do this week, okay? If leadership is your gift, if you have that gift, block off time in your calendar every week, and maybe it's just an hour a week, but block off some time for you to develop it. Like read just one leadership book this quarter. Attend some sort of a leadership conference online or go in person somewhere. But put some real energy into stewarding what God gave you. And if leadership is not your gift, stop grinding in that guilt. Like, here's what you should do. Write down 2 or 3 names of people in your church who show signs of leadership gifting. Invite them to coffee and tell them what you see in them, and then give them real responsibility. Delegate some leadership to them. When pastors treat leadership as less spiritual, the whole church suffers, the body suffers, the kingdom suffers. It's like an ear trying to be a nose. We know what Paul said about that. But when we recognize it as a spiritual gift and a stewardship, and then we steward it faithfully, the body can flourish. So don't suppress it, don't hoard it, steward it. If you're looking, by the way, for more practical ways to grow your leadership or empower leaders in your church, listen, that's exactly why I created, well, my coaching business, but it's also why I do things like leadership labs and pressure valve sessions. These are different online experiences with me where we take a topic and we dive deep into it. It could be something that you would enjoy doing, maybe some staff members would enjoy, maybe even elders or core volunteers in your church would benefit from some of that. So even if you don't join me though at any of those things, here's what I just can't encourage you enough. Take the step this week to stop treating leadership like it's less spiritual, because the Spirit gave it to the church and gave it to people for a reason.